show. And for me, it was from the jump. Look, it's Adam Peters. It's an organization that's earned some trust. Let's go with it. And I'll give you more of my thoughts in a moment. But I was really surprised, I guess, at how many of you just hated it. Now, a lot of you loved it. I'm not saying this is not, creating some sort of inaccurate straw man argument, but because a lot of you loved the pick. But God, there were so many of you that had a major issue with them taking just an offensive lineman. Some of you got into the details of the linemen that they took versus some of the others that were available. I'll read just a couple real quickly. This came from Mac. Mac wrote, "What are they doing? Did they see the game in Philadelphia? Defense, for God's sakes. Mike Green was the second best defensive player in the draft. Help me, please, Kevin." This from Gary. Gary wrote, he wrote UH like 5 times. A left tackle? Question mark, question mark. Didn't they just trade for one of the best left tackles in the league? What am I missing? This from Daniel PX. They whiffed on Coleman, which forced them to trade for Tunsil, and now pick another O-lineman when they desperately needed defense. Let AP cook is becoming a punchline. All right, so I love the passion and the arguments that we have and the debates that we have. I'm never going to not love them because everybody's entitled to their opinion. Totally your prerogative to hate the pick. I mean, we're sports fans. That's what we do without a lot of information much of the time. I'm going to give you my thoughts on the pick here shortly, but I do want to start with this, and it's for what it's worth, because I've mentioned this before when it comes to offensive linemen. For fans like me anyway, all right? I'm speaking for myself. I think it is the hardest of the positions to generate any real passion for one way or the other. Usually when I hear someone, a fan or even somebody in my business standing on a table and screaming for a specific offensive lineman, I think it's more about someone else's analysis rather than theirs. All due respect. No offense. Because most of us don't have the legitimate ability. I'm saying most of us who didn't play the game or coach the game or scout the game, most of us don't have the legitimate ability to evaluate, well, any position really, let alone one as complex and often system-driven and often hidden in many ways as offensive linemen. Always hard, for me anyway, to generate sincere enthusiasm for a tackle, guard, or center. I have a friend of mine who played college football, was a starting center in college football at the D3 level, and I trust his opinion because he's also coached for years. But that's just me. I always feel like this position is the hard one. We all feel like, even though we really don't know, we all feel like we have a pretty good, beat on quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, pass rusher, big, ugly on defense that wrecks the game, linebackers. Corners, I think, are very difficult positions to evaluate because it's so system-driven. It's so coached differently in every single situation. Of course, we can understand 40 time and sub times and, size and arm length, etc. Those kinds of things. But I don't know. I just think I love these conversations, and I love the conversations, as most of you know, about the games, going into them and coming out of them. I think the draft conversation is always a tough one, but an entertaining one. And the reason it's tough is that the people that get paid to do it, like general managers in the league, are wrong 65 to 70% when they pick players. Just, understand we get all worked up every year, and it's a great television show and it's a lot of fun, but the bottom line is the guys that are getting paid millions of dollars a year to do this get it wrong 65 to 70%. And if they get it wrong only 60% of the time, they're among the elite in the game at evaluating. Now, I do think it's fair to evaluate, players based on where they were taken relative to, the consensus. That's fine. Did Atlanta really need to trade a future first-round pick to move up into the first round to take James Pierce? Maybe they did. Maybe that's the player they were in love with, and they realized that somebody was going to take him regardless of the red flags all over James Pierce. But, the Falcons have kind of screwed things up a little bit here in recent years. You get a sense for a guy like Terry Fontenot, like, what's he doing? Like, the consensus was Pierce was going to fall out of the first round, like Green did, because of, some of the intangible stuff, but maybe every team was comfortable with that. That's possible too. That every team was comfortable with it and they realized the player was way too good to be sitting there at, where did they take him? At 20, where was Pierce taken? 26, they traded up for Pierce. Maybe they thought, a team like Baltimore or maybe Washington would take him if they didn't get up in front. I doubt Washington would have taken Pierce. But I think, evaluating based on where the player was taken relative to a consensus, sometimes works. But like in a draft like the one we are involved in right now, almost everybody has said, including general managers around the league, this is a draft where basically players 6 through 60 are not that different from one another. So it's kind of hard. Now, let me get to my thoughts on the pick. Because it's a position that is tough to evaluate for most of us, I totally trust in Adam Peters, and I trust in the organization. They've earned that here over a year. Like, I would say to Gary and Daniel and who was the other one, Mac, yeah, I think they did see the game in Philadelphia. It was the NFC Championship game there, Mac. They had won 14 of the 19 games they had played last year to play in the NFC Championship. And by the way, they added a lot. Now, it wasn't, headline stuff in the offseason defensively, but they added a bunch of players defensively. And I would guess that they recognize that defensively they struggled at the end of last year, that they struggled to stop the run pretty much all season long, and that in the NFC title game, getting off the field was a problem. I think they probably understood that going in. I do. Like, yeah, they were there. And as far as whiffing on Coleman, again, 2 out of every 3 picks are whiffs for everybody. In the history of this thing, 2 out of every 3 basically is a whiff. Now, if you're whiffing on 3 out of 4, if your whiff rate is 75%, you probably don't have a job. But if you're hitting, on 2 out of 5 at 40%, now you're probably getting paid big bucks. It is a game, the draft, of many more misses than hits. Have they whiffed on Coleman? I don't know that they've whiffed on Coleman. Okay, he's not a left tackle in their opinion. And maybe we learned last night he's not a right tackle. But maybe they believe he can be an outstanding guard. And if he ends up being an outstanding guard, it was a good pick. 3rd round. So I, number one, trust in this group because they did play in the NFC Championship game last year. We got to, going into this thing, it's like you got to give this whole thing. Josh Harris, front office, new coaching staff, 3 years. I mean, they were literally at the studs of this home. They had to totally rebuild the whole thing. And real quickly, we got one hell of a big, great room in the first year. All right. I trust in them, number one. Number two, the pick is a trench pick, we've talked about since the end of the season. This was part of what you thought they would emphasize in the offseason. Free agency and the draft. Philadelphia is big and bad in the trenches. Oh, by the way, the other NFC East teams that they play twice a year have excellent pass rushers. Thirdly, their most prized possession, the most prized possession in the organization is Jaden Daniels. So what did they do here in the offseason? They traded for one of the best left tackles in the game because they really felt like they needed a legitimate upgrade at that position. And they drafted in the first round a guy that will likely get an opportunity to start at right tackle. And you've got bookend tackles protecting your most prized possession. Now, if the player turns out not to be any good, because Tunsil we know is good. You know, when you trade for a player with that much, wear on the tire, we've seen enough to know he's legit good. Conerly Jr., a lot of people love the pick. I didn't see the pick panned, and I was looking for expert opinion on the pick. I went and watched everything that you guys watched last night. And I will say that before the draft, even though we talked about some offensive linemen and talked about an offensive lineman being a possibility, I didn't think a guy that only played left tackle in college was going to be the selection. So I didn't spend a lot of time looking at Josh Conerly. I didn't spend a lot of time looking at offensive linemen in general. So I can't tell you if Simmons would have been the better pick, or they should have taken Donovan Jackson and traded up for him. Or if he had been available. Adam Peters, and I'm telling you, everything he said last year after the Jaden Daniels thing was said going into it and said after it to me from people in the know, that he was the guy right from the jump. So when he says we got a ton of calls when we were on the clock, we got calls throughout the week, just preliminary calls like we talked about earlier in the week in our presser. And then we got a ton of calls leading up to that. And what we discussed beforehand is really, if he was on the board, we weren't going to trade back. And so there was an opportunity to trade back with a few other teams. Wasn't very far, but in our minds, it was not even worth risking missing on him. So I'm going to take him at his word. I feel like over the last year, most of what I've learned about what he said publicly has been true. And he doesn't disclose a lot. But he told you last night, we got calls. We had opportunities. We had tons of opportunities to trade back. And not even that far to trade back. Meaning maybe they could have gotten Conerly and picked up a pick, but they didn't want to risk it. And I do think, and I've talked about this a lot, look, the more swings you get, ultimately, the better. Because if your hit rate's going to be 34, 35, 36, 37%, you'd rather have that on 10 players picked than 5 players picked. If you really, if it really is the crapshoot that, it tends to be every year. But I also don't like when you have a player that you really like and you think is easily the best player on your board, and you've loved him, and everybody in the organization loved him. I'll trust Adam Peters on that. You risk the, Ryan Kerrigan, JJ Watt situation in 2011. No offense to Ryan Kerrigan, because he was a very good NFL player and a really good player for a long time here. And now, he's got a budding coaching career. But JJ Watt's a Hall of Famer. And you traded back from 11 to 16, I think it was in that draft, or 9 to 16, and you missed out on an opportunity for a Hall of Fame player. Now, maybe they didn't have him rated in the same way they had Ryan Kerrigan. So I don't mind when they love a player and that player is best player easily on their board and they want that player. I don't mind the not trading back. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. Now, the player himself, look, he's big. He is athletic, had a very good athletic, relative athletic score for the position. That has been a thing. And, I was looking through the RAS scores for this draft. I've looked at them already before, but I was looking to see who's left for tonight that scored very well, players that might fit, positions of need also, and there's one in particular, and I've talked about him already leading into the draft, and I'll get to that coming up here in the first hour. But this dude's big, he's athletic, he's smart. I've read, I can't tell you how many different reviews, but there was something that somebody sent me. Hoffman mentioned this to me last night. It's called The Beast. It's the guy from The Athletic. Sorry, I'm blanking on his name. Dane Brugler. Dane Brugler writes something called The Beast. Anyway, he does an extensive write-up, and Hoffman was talking to me about it last night. I was unfamiliar with it. So I looked up Conerly, and he's got a lot of good, lot of information. And this sort of runs parallel with a lot of the other information, but I liked a lot of this. And by the way, in watching some of the highlights, this dude really is athletic. Like, he can really move. And when a guy can really move, you understand why they would want him in the Kingsbury scheme. They need their offensive linemen to be able to get out, on bubbles, on screens, quick game, etc. By the way, did you see what Adam Peters held up? He had a piece of paper that he showed everybody. It was from Cliff Kingsbury. He left a note on Adam Peters' desk. I guess it was yesterday. Please, the Oregon tackle. Kingsbury apparently loved Conerly Jr. But a couple of things about Conerly stood out in this write-up from Brugler and others. Obviously, this is a big man, with good arm length. Not the longest arm length, but really solid arm length. And then very, very quick in the immediate line of scrimmage, plus 10 area. Scored very well. The RAS score, very good for the position. And the write-up was outstanding lateral quicks, change of direction, and overall movement skills. Explosive jump setter to easily cut off pass rush angles. Elite recovery balance. Average height, he's 6'4.5", close to 6'5". But above average arm length and big hands. The above average arm length, and maybe this has gotten to the in recent years to an area where it's not as applicable because we've seen some shorter arm, very good tackles in the game. But remember when Brandon Sheriff was selected, pretty much Jay Gruden and everybody in that organization knew that he was a guard, not a tackle, because he had shorter arms. You'd rather have longer arms as a tackle. You put those arms on somebody. By the way, it can help with respect to lack of quickness. But anyway, keeps a head on a swivel to locate blitzes and stunts. Light feet and body control to seal front side on zone reads. It goes on, but really what it speaks to is athleticism. He's very athletic. He may not be overpowering, but he is right now very athletic, and they want athletes. And with the quick stuff that they run, with the get it out of his hands on bubbles, on screens, that's what you're looking for. He finished his career at Oregon, 28 straight starts, did not miss a start basically in 2 seasons. And he allowed only 6 pressures over his final 12 starts, all of those coming against Ohio State. More on that when we start looking at second round. Did well against Abdul Carter. Remember, Oregon, for those of you that may have forgotten, was in the Big Ten this year. So I like the pick. This is another investment in Jaden. And there's one other thing to just think about, looking ahead. And I think that this was something, when I brought up offensive line as a possibility, this is what I was speaking to in most cases. You probably are going to be moving on from Wiley and from Allegretti. Remember, the investment in Allegretti in particular was, at the time, we didn't even know if he'd be a starter for sure. But he did. He started and he was fine. But what this to me says is it's Tunsil at left tackle, of course. By the way, Tunsil, being an older player, maybe the long-term solution is Conerly Jr. at left tackle when Tunsil gets older. But he plays the first part of his career at right tackle. But I think what we'll see is we'll see Tunsil, We will see Allegretti probably to start. Biotish, because Cosme's out with the ACL, at least for the first portion of the year. That's where you see Coleman, and then you see Conerly Jr. at right tackle. That would be my guess. Now, if Conerly Jr. is not ready for right tackle, Coleman can play right tackle. He could play inside. When Cosme comes back, that's where I think ultimately you end up with an offensive line that is Tunsil, Coleman, Biotish, Cosme, and Conerly Jr., whether that's at some point this year or that's in 2026. You can't go wrong if you trust the evaluators, and so far there's no reason to not trust the evaluators. In the division they're in and the team that they most have to beat out, investing in the offensive line to protect your quarterback, and by the way, potentially to run the ball better. Remember what happened towards the last third of the season? We couldn't run the football unless it was the quarterback running. That, by the way, is a part of what they were probably paying attention to also. You know, we talked a lot about why aren't the running backs gaining more yards? Well, is it the runners? Is it the O-line? Is it in their read option game? Is it maybe the quarterback not making the right decisions? Is it play calling? Is it scheme? Who knows? But I think what they've told you is we want to get better at running the football. And by the way, we want to get better and more consistent protecting our most prized possession. I have no problem with this pick. I have no idea if it'll work out. None. I don't have a strong feel on the player like I do at other positions. But I totally am fine with the pick. And there's just no chance you could get me to like pan the pick just because I wasn't expecting it. And just because guys like Mike Green were still on the board. I loved Mike Green watching him. I thought he was the second best edge behind Abdul Carter in the draft. But his issues at UVA and in high school, and who knows what else, clearly Mike Green was the guy that fell along with Will Johnson because of injuries, the corner from Michigan. So, you know, I said going into this, there are a couple of players I don't think they'll take. And Pierce Jr.'s work ethic, red flags were a big issue, but I thought that Green in part wouldn't even be an option for them because I thought somebody would end up taking him. He's available. Will Johnson, because of injuries, available. That's interesting to me. I mean, yesterday on the show, I forget, Max, was it Chris or Craig who picked Will Johnson to be the pick for Washington? He's falling.
Craig was banging that drum most of the day. Yeah.
So Craig said he's falling, and he that was his pick, and I'm like, if he falls to 29, there's got to be a major problem, and I don't see Washington taking that. But he was right that he dropped, and a lot of mock drafts had him dropping leading up to yesterday. There's a lot that they had on the board. They had Azaraku as a pass rusher. He didn't get picked in the first round. They had Green. They had a couple of the corners available, and they had a player in mind. And maybe if Conerly Jr. had gone before, maybe they would have accepted one of those trade backs. We wouldn't have gotten a pick, and we would have had a couple to get excited about tonight. But there are a lot of opportunities tonight. I can't wait to see what they decide to do. I think, in terms of at 61, there are going to be running backs. There are going to be corners. There's still going to potentially be edges available. There's one player, and I've talked about him, that I really kind of fell in love with that was more projected late on night 2. And in some cases, even day 3. But he had the third best relative athletic score of all of the players that were tested for that. And he would fill a need. I would bet that Washington is interested in Darian Porter. from Iowa State. I don't know if 61's too early, but Darian Porter had the third best relative athletic score, RAS score, and he is an outstanding, big, long, physically imposing corner who also has been a phenomenal special teams player. And he ran in addition to having the third best RAS score, he ran the third best 40 time. 6'3", long arms, can play zone, can play man. That's a guy that I would look at if he's on the board at 61 for tonight, just based on what they've been looking for. You know, we know the character. The dude plays special teams. He didn't start for many years, got his first opportunity this year, but he's off the charts athletic, off the charts tall, long, and, you know, seems to be they went with a high RAS score for an offensive lineman last night, a real athletic lineman. I would look in that general direction tonight. There are other players, too, at other positions that had high scores that are available tonight as well. But I pointed out Porter because that was the one where he jumps off when you watch highlights from a fan perspective, for sure, because he is an outlier size-wise, athlete-wise, and just aggressiveness-wise. I mean, the dude blocked 4 punts and a field goal in college. All right. Let's give you a chance. 301-230-0980, 301-230-0980. Your thoughts on Josh Conerly Jr. There are a couple of things I want to play for you when we come back. Some of what Adam Peters said, and a longtime NFL player and NFL coach who I've always enjoyed his thoughts. He weighed in on Josh Conerly. You'll hear that as well. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980, theteam980.com. We're free and live on the Odyssey app.
Honestly, was I expecting it? Yeah. Because I was ready to go. But yeah, no, it's God-given opportunity, man.
That was Josh Conerly Jr. last night. By the way, I think Washington's fear last night about losing Conerly, had they traded back just a few spots, was Kansas City at 32. Kansas City ended up trading with Philly, actually. Philly took Jahad Campbell at 31. The two Super Bowl teams made a trade. But they selected Josh Simmons from Ohio State. And I think maybe they believed that Conerly Jr. would have been the pick for the Chiefs at 32. Just keep that in mind for those of you that are like, hey, they could have traded back, gotten another picked him early in the second round. Maybe they didn't think so. And in fact, Adam Peters kind of said that. 301-230-0980, 301-230-0980. I want your thoughts on the drafting of Josh Conerly Jr. I did want to play this from Adam Peters last night because he was asked about specifically where they see him playing. Here's what he said.
Yeah, I think, what's cool about our team and our program and how DQ coaches is it's competition. And, iron sharpens iron. So I think probably the only one I can say, and we'll leave these up to the coaches, the only one I can say is LT is going to be on at LT, and then the rest of them, they'll compete for the rest of the spots, I think. So to answer your question more specifically, he can play guard and he can play tackle. So he's played both. He played a little right tackle in the Senior Bowl, and that's not totally foreign to him, and he's practiced at it. So, whether it's left guard, right tackle, I don't think it'll be center. Although I do think he could play center if we needed him to. That's probably what he'll compete at those spots.
There you go. By the way, I think, LT, as in Laramie Tunsil, is going to be the LT, the left tackle, is the one he knows. I would say Tyler Biotish is going to be the center. But those are the two spots that And then when Sam Cosmi is healthy and ready and 100%, he's certainly going to be in the lineup as their starting right guard, next to the right tackle. And I'm just going to guess that it's Conerly Jr. It's a rookie offensive lineman. He wasn't the number 4 pick. It's possible that Wiley ends up being the starter to start the season, and that Conerly isn't ready to go. You don't know, but that is what they've done. It's about competition, and it's going to be interesting to watch it play out. I do think that Tunsil and Conerly Jr. mean that Allegretti and Andrew Wiley's days essentially are numbered after this upcoming season. I think that they they saw the ability to get better. It didn't play terrible last year, the offensive line in general. Part of that was scheme. Part of that was quarterback. The year before, it was rough with the coordinator. It was rough with the quarterback. And there was this thought that offensive line-wise heading into last year was a disaster. Quinn basically told you before the season started that the perception from the outside about a certain position group probably is a little bit off. I know that he was talking specifically about the offensive line. They liked Cosmi. They loved Biotish. They thought he would be really, really good. They had high hopes for Brandon Coleman. They knew that, Allegretti and Wiley were potential guys that could really help them with a young quarterback. But they needed to get better because Philly's in the division. And by the way, so is Micah Parsons. And so is Dexter Lawrence and Brian Burns. And now Abdul Carter. So keeping that quarterback upright, being able to run the football with people other than the quarterback, I don't have a problem with this at all. And again, when it comes to the position, I think, just me, maybe not you guys, just me, it's hard for me to really tell you the difference between Josh Simmons and Josh Conerly Jr., other than what you read. All right, 301-230-0980. What did you think, Max? I'll give you a chance to weigh in before we get to the callers.
So initially I was very surprised because I was feverishly refreshing my timeline when we were on the clock. I was doing it most of the night too, but a lot more so when the Commanders were on the clock. And Ben Standig, he was the first one on it. He said Josh Conerly Jr. tackle Oregon. And initially I was like, what? Okay. Because it kind of tells you how much what they think about Brandon Coleman. I think he's going to go the way of Brandon Scherf. He's going to get kicked inside the guard. I think he's going to be successful there because he had a lot of success there at TCU. But
Right.
Conerly, like, is just I went to sleep watching a little bit of his tape, and it was the game against Ohio State. He was anchoring really well. He waits for, he doesn't like attack. He waits for, the defensive end to come at him and reacts accordingly, which I think is really good for an offensive tackle, especially with his size. So I like it. But I don't, I'm not over the moon for it. I completely understand the reasoning. You want to wrap Jaden Daniels in bubble wrap, essentially, with the offensive line. So I'm all for it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not shocked that they picked an offensive lineman. Like, I do think that if Tyler Booker and Dallas took him pretty early, I do think that that's the player, had he dropped, that would have been another one that would have been difficult for them to turn down, even though his, RAS, relative athletic score, wasn't anywhere near Conerly Jr.'s.
824 for Conerly.
I was a bit, I'm sorry?
824, I think, for Conerly.
886, I think, overall.
Pretty good.
Really good for an offensive lineman.
Yeah.
I when they got there, I really did not think it would be Green or Johnson. They had fallen too far, which meant red flags all over the two players. I did think Azaruko was going to be a possibility there. I also thought there were some corners, including Hairston, that were possible there. Although there was some baggage stuff on Hairston that maybe that they shied away from there as well. There's no way I would have guessed Conerly Jr. I just said, like I said yesterday, I think any position other than quarterback is possible. A pure left tackle, which he's not. And they said, at the Senior Bowl, he played some right tackle. Clearly, they feel comfortable with him playing right tackle. One other thing that I wanted to just mention, too, because the system that he came from, with the quarterback that they had this year in Dylan Gabriel, was a short quarterback, okay? Very short quarterback, but God, does he process quickly, and the ball was always out quickly. And Dan Lanning, as that, coach and as an offensive mind, they always look, Oregon's always looking for athleticism at every position. And he was in an offense where the ball was getting out quickly, but they were running the football. They were dynamic. They were spread. And I would imagine that's one of the reasons Kingsbury loved him, because there's similarities in Lanning and Kingsbury and Oregon and, what Texas Tech was and what Kingsbury is implemented at the NFL level. He's probably a guy that Kingsbury's just very used to watching, that kind of offensive lineman. All right, 301-230-0980. Phone lines are packed. Let's start with Fuad in Silver Spring. Fuad, go ahead. What'd you think of Josh Conerly Jr.? And if you want to take a shot at something for tonight, go ahead.
Kevin, I love it. Everybody complains about, we got to build our line until we actually build it. The same people that are complaining about this pick will be the same people that complain, we can't keep Jaden upright when we're going against Philly and all of these defensive linemen. So I love the pick. We're strengthening a point of strength for us. And, hey, give me one or more of these guys. We kick Coleman into guard. I know how much you love the Redskins, man. We could really throw back and revive the heritage and bring the Hogs back and just maul people and abuse them up front. And yeah, we saw Kansas City had the best quarterback in the game, but he couldn't do anything because his line couldn't deal with Philly's pressure. So if we see ourselves as a team that can get there, we're going to have to make sure we invest in that line. So I love it. And I'm so happy that we got football people making these football decisions. And Adam Peters, we trust, man.
Thanks, Fuad. Appreciate it. Yeah, the league is always sort of a creature of recency. And a responder to recency. And what we saw in the Super Bowl was a line of scrimmage just absolutely dominated, and the Chiefs throttled up front. They had offensive line issues, of course. And look, Washington's in their division. Washington's in Philly's division. Philly's offensive line. The offensive line in New York isn't bad. The offensive line in Dallas, is probably a year or two away from being, really good again. But you got to be able to, move, as Doc would say, move grown men on the other line of the scrimmage, on the other side of the line of scrimmage in the direction they don't want to go. I don't have a problem with them thinking trenches, and certainly don't have a problem with them taking the best player available. And clearly for them, it was, if you take Adam Peters at his word, that there were opportunities to trade back, because trading back isn't always the right thing to do. But in a draft like this one, it certainly seemed attractive enough. So they loved the player. Let's go to my guy, Chad, in Nashville. Chad, thanks for holding. Go ahead.
What's going on, Kevin? Long time no talk, bro.
Hey, Chad, what's going
on? So first off, I'm glad he brought up the Super Bowl. Nobody should have paid attention more to that Super Bowl than, besides Chiefs fans, other than Redskins fans. Like, we play that twice a year. So I don't think anybody should be shocked if they went into this draft and were like, listen, we played that 2 times a year. If we're going to beat them, we got to protect the quarterback. They had a Hall of Fame quarterback and Hall of Fame coach, and he couldn't even pass the ball past the center without getting hit. So
right.
I was not surprised by that. And if you also think about it this way, you have Jaden Daniels. As far as picking a receiver at 29, and I agreed with you totally recently in the last few weeks, I would not pick a running back. It's too deep at the first round. But you don't really need to pick an offensive weapon that high when you have Jaden Daniels, in my opinion, right now. You can look what Sean McVay does in L.A. all the time. He comes up, he finds receivers all the time in 3rd, 2nd, 4th, 5th round. So when you have Jaden Daniels, get me a guy who's fast and can catch the ball. Can you do that? That's all I need. Now, keeping them upright is more important going against the Eagles' front defensive line. So I'm all for it. I didn't even know the name, but I did remember watching Oregon. And when I saw Cliff's little note that AP wanted to hold up, I thought, oh, perfect. Everybody should be excited about that too, because our GM is on the same page with our offensive coordinator and our head coach. So yeah. I love it. I love the pick. It's kind of exciting. It's like, oh, an offensive line. Who cares? We got Jaden Daniels, baby. 2026. Let's go. Thanks, Kevin.
Yeah, well, the point that you made, and all of them were good points, actually, but the point you made that, you don't need offensive weapons when your quarterback is perhaps a top 3 offensive weapon, top 4 offensive weapon in the game. Well, you do need others, because you don't want him to be your primary run weapon, which is what he turned into last year. So I think that you're going to want, I think they're going to want to be more effective running the football, which will make it even easier for Jaden, with running backs, with an offensive line that can move the other side of the line of scrimmage. That's got to be an emphasis. Their running backs basically were averaging 2 yards per carry over the last, 4 or 5 games of the season. It wasn't good enough. By the way, he got pressured more. Now, they were playing some teams that had the ability to pressure better down the stretch, including, obviously, in the postseason, Tampa and Philly specifically. But again, I mean, this is not necessarily a flip of the coin. It's worse than a flip of the coin. They loved him. The building loved him. I bet you they thought Kansas City would have taken him at 32 or 31. They ended up trading back with Philadelphia. I'm fine with it. 301-230-0980. I see everybody on hold. Stay there. We'll take calls for a while so you can weigh in and, give me an idea of what you're thinking about for tonight, too. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980, the team980.com. We're free and live on the Odyssey app. And by the way, you can download that app and you can stream us now on the Team 980's YouTube page, or just go to the Team 980's YouTube page. Hit the subscribe button for us. That helps us a lot. And hit the like button, the thumbs up button. That helps us a lot as well.
All right, last night, Commanders headlines. Stick and pick at 29. They select Josh Conerly Jr., the offensive tackle out of Oregon. He matched up versus Abdul Carter in the Big Ten championship. New York took him with the number 3 overall pick. Conerly had 35 pass block snaps against Carter, 0 sacks, 0 pressures. Speaking of Giants drafting Abdul Carter at 3, plus they traded up with the Texans at 25 overall to draft Jackson Dart from Ole Miss. The Cowboys reached for Alabama guard Tyler Booker, and the Eagles traded up for Jahad Campbell at 31. The Nats last night wrapped up the Battle of the Beltway with a loss to the Orioles 2-1. They will take on the Mets tonight here on the Team 980. To the ice, the Caps make the trip to Montreal for Game 3. They were joined by Alexi Protas, who had missed both games due to a cut on his foot. You could see him tonight or on Sunday. The Caps are looking to take a 3-0 series lead at the Bell Center. That will be on 106.7 The Fan. This update is sponsored by the Team 980's YouTube page. Just open the app, type in the Team 980, and hit subscribe. Kevin Sheehan is live from 10 to 1 and Craig Hoffman from 4 to 7. Don't forget to like the stream and turn on notifications to stay up to date on all things DC sports. And that's what's trending.
Conerly had a really good game against Abdul Carter in the Big Ten title game. All right. I think many of you who have been spending time looking at that have seen that. He had a good game against JT Tuimoloau in the regular season, not so much in the playoff game, but they were forced to throw the ball in that game. But I'm telling you, that Big Ten title game, Penn State's defense was good all year long. And you're talking about quick game and getting the ball out. And that's what Lanning did. And that's what Gabriel did, whether it was to James out of the backfield or Tez Johnson, or the kid Holden, number one, I think Holden was number one. They just, they always were able to scheme. Oregon was, splits are a little bit different. O-line plays a little bit different, but these guys know what they're looking at. I'm good with this. Absolutely good with the whole idea of just we weren't terrible last year, but we could be a lot better, and that'll make Jaden better, and it'll protect Jaden. All right, phone lines are open. We got calls to take. Let's get to the phone lines. Let's get to my guy Paulie. Paulie, thanks for holding. Go.
L to the W, man. What's going on, big guy?
What's up?
Yeah, man. Hey, listen, I'm in agreement with you and the previous callers, man. You can't be upset about this. You got to protect the 5. That's what this is all about. He's our franchise player. And another thing that you was leading to was like, everybody wanted to blame Brian Robinson for the running game last year, but it's not just Brian Robinson. They know more than we know. They see more than we see. So you can't never go wrong with building up your front, building up your offensive line. Like back when the Eagles had Peters, they had Lane Johnson on the other side. We wasn't criticizing Lane Johnson or calling him less of a tackle. We was calling him one of the best linemen in the league. So, I mean, this is all positive. You look at our 5 losses last year, we got dominated up front in 3 games against Philly. Even though we won one of them, we still got dominated up front. That Dallas game, we got dominated up front.
We did get dominated by Dallas up front.
Yeah, both games. We got dominated up front by Dallas. So, it was clearly a weakness. And when you got 5, arguably the top 3 quarterback in the league, you got to protect them. You know
who else dominated us up front late in the season? New Orleans did. We couldn't block Cam Jordan. We couldn't block anybody in that game.
Tampa Bay did. We were just able to pull these games out. That a lot of the games we won, we got dominated up front, but we had 5.
We had 5.
You know what I mean? So let's make it easy on 5, man. Protect 5. And far as today go, I think now is when you might look for that playmaker on offense or that playmaker on defense, man. Cornerback or running back, man. Or if Mike Green's up there, maybe they take a shot at him. I don't know. But today is the playmaker night. So I'll say that, man. Hell to the W.
All right, thanks. I mean, playmaker, I don't know. It could be edge. Could be corner. Travion Henderson, I think, is gone by 61. That would be my guess. All right. I see everybody there. Sorry. We're up against a hard break. Ian, Rob, Jason, Billy, DC, Gary, Alex, stay on hold. We have another line that just opened up, 301-230-0980. Your thoughts on Josh Conerly Jr., and then what would you like to see him do tonight? Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980 and the team980.com. Ben's been talking to various people around the league. He'll join us at 12, and we will look ahead to tonight with Ben at 12. Before that, Lenell's going to jump on with us at 11:40. I want to get Lenell's thoughts on the pick last night. But let's give you guys a chance here. 301-230-0980. What'd you think of the pick? Josh Conerly Jr. I like the pick. I'm fine with the pick. Like I said, it's hard to evaluate for me anyway. Maybe some of you are more expert at it. Offensive linemen in particular, it's hard to have true passionate feelings. Now, when you see some dude at the college level that's 6'7" and 365 and athletic and just mowing people down like Trent Williams was, not necessarily that big, you can identify that. The rest of it is hard. We're much better at being wrong at evaluating quarterbacks, wide receivers, and running backs. But I trust them. And the fact that there were, and I believe it to be true after talking to a few people, opportunities to trade back, pick up picks, but this was a player they were dead set on. I do think the Chiefs were probably the team they were concerned about. If they had traded back let's just say 6 or 7 picks and it had something early in the second round, they would have perhaps lost out on Conerly Jr. 301-230-0980. Ian, go ahead.
Kevin, I agree and disagree with you. Where I agree with you is it's very difficult to evaluate the offensive line position. I agree any position for this team was a position of need. Offensive line, defensive line, cornerback, safety, wide receiver, running back. So I don't think you could have gone wrong in any position per se. Where I disagree with you is this notion that because Washington made the NFC title game, Adam Peters and Dan Quinn are above reproach. And to me, if you look at the acquisitions Peters made and the draft picks he made, I can't say this is Howie Roseman or Eric DaCosta or someone who's getting Pro Bowlers left and right. Luvu, Wagner, home runs last year. Jane Daniels is the game changer of all game changers. But there are many picks, acquisitions, Lattimore, et cetera, that right now it's hard to say, oh, in Peters we trust. And to me, I think the question I have is, as of now, the biggest weakness for the 2024 Washington Commanders was the defense. And as of now, I don't see how the 2025 Commanders have a better defense between free agency and or the draft night one. It doesn't seem like the defense is going to be significantly better or even slightly better as of now. So for me, again, I have no objection with the philosophy of drafting a lineman. I have no evaluation of the player, but I would have liked to see more emphasis on defensive playmakers given how much the defense struggled in 2024.
All right. So a couple of things. Number one, beyond reproach is a hell of a lot different than benefit of the doubt. I'm in benefit of the doubt mode. Okay.
Okay.
I'm not
fair.
Okay. That there's a big difference there. And by the way, I think they've earned the benefit of the doubt. Secondly, there's a recognition that even the best get two out of 3 wrong. So I'm not expecting for them to be perfect. What I do think is that based on the quarterback that they have, maybe some of the things that they did in the offseason, including Laramie Tunsil, including Marshawn Lattimore, fingers crossed on him. That wasn't the offseason, but in season. Deebo Samuel, I think that they think differently about themselves defensively than we do. And time will tell because there is a lot of variance year to year with defense. I think they put themselves into a position to draft the best player that was available on their board as long as it wasn't a quarterback. And if they did that, and I believe that they did that, it's hard for me to be critical of it, period. And when it's also a pick that is investing in not only your trenches offensively, but in the protection of your most prized possession, I can't generate, especially because of the position, which you agreed with, I can't generate enough passion to be critical or even constructively critical of it. But, you start, benefit of the doubt is my mode, not beyond reproach.
Right.
Because I thought they gave Javon Kinlaw way too much money.
Right. That's a fair point. So again, I don't disagree with what you're saying, and you're right. Like maybe reproach is too strong a word, your benefit of the doubt. You broke down so much tape on your podcast, this, that, the other. At no point did you kind of even talk about this player. Like I think if you polled the fan base, most people would have said, we need defensive playmakers. I mean, to me,
well, they liked him more than the defensive playmakers that were on the board. But
again, like it's hard.
You make your biggest mistakes. Every good GM has always said you make your biggest mistakes when you draft for need and you pass on a player that's the best player available on your board, and that's what they did. I'm taking them at their word. And by the way, the RAS score and some of the athleticism with this player, and look, on the beyond reproach versus benefit of the doubt, what it also says is, they were wrong about Brandon Coleman if they thought he was going to be their long-term answer at left tackle, but I'm glad they recognized it now and they've done something about it. Yeah. Thanks for the call.
I agree. Can I ask you one question?
Quickly.
So say the draft went exactly as is and Washington's at their pick. Would you have rather taken Philly's pick?
I like the player. You're talking about Jahad Campbell.
Correct.
Yeah. I like the player a lot. I think that he's like perfect for Philadelphia. Obviously, we'll see about the injury and how long it's going to take him to be ready to play, because there is some discussion about him not being ready to play at the beginning of the year. There were a lot of players that I personally liked a lot more than some of the offensive linemen, but they didn't. And they know. And the reason we didn't spend a lot of time on Conerly Jr. or Simmons or any of that is because it is a hard position to evaluate. I did not think that offensive line was off the table at 29. We talked about that, and I think if Tyler Booker, and he didn't fall, he got drafted at 12 overall, I think he would have been the pick, and we did talk about him. All right, let me get on to some other callers. Thank you, Ian. Let's go to Billy and Chantilly. Billy, go ahead.
Kevin, this is another amazing day for the Commanders and the future of this organization. I couldn't be more excited that Adam recognizes the value of JD5. I mean, the guy is not only the best player on our team, the best player in the NFC, he's probably the best player in the NFL. And beyond that, if I'm looking at the draft and the reaction of those young guys that got drafted, and congrats to all of them, Jaden Daniels is the face of the NFL for the next 5 to 10 years. That's how spectacular this guy is as a star. I also would evaluate the draft choices by the teams in our division. I mean, to me, Philly had the best defense. And what did they do? They had no offense. Look, if you switch quarterbacks in the NFC Championship, the Eagles with Jaden Daniels at the quarterback and us,
they would have won by more than 32?
They would have won by 120.
Yeah.
And the Commanders wouldn't have scored a point. That's what a difference maker Jaden Daniels is for this team. The Giants, they picked a quarterback and it was an absolute Hail Mary that this guy can play. And they picked an edge rusher because they know they got to slow down JD5. And the Cowboys, they're clueless, so they took a guard. The other teams in the league have, through my observation, selected based on the fact that they know they have to slow down JD5. So maybe selecting a player that isn't the best, but you're selecting by position isn't the ideal way to go about it. But I'll take that over being a team that has to draft trying to slow down a player that's on the other team. And that's the way they got to view it.
Okay. First, I love you, and I love your enthusiasm about JD5, and I have the same level of enthusiasm. But the best way in today's NFL to slow down a quarterback of that level is to have your own quarterback at that level, because that's the only way long term you're going to end up with more wins than the other team. It's not loading up on Abdul Carter to go with Brian Burns and Thibodeau. We've seen it. Myles Garrett's been one of the most dominant defensive players that we've ever seen in the game. They didn't have a quarterback. You beat teams with great quarterbacks by finding your own, and it's hard. It's really
You're
hard to
never
do. That's
finding-
why
there-
Washington's
this
in such
guy
a
is-
good spot here over the next several years. Thank you,
He's
Billy.
got the 1 in a million. He's a 1 in a million.
Appreciate it. Let's go to Mark in Chevy Chase. Mark, thanks for holding. Go ahead. Mark, you there?
Yes, I'm right here. Hello.
Got you now.
Hello. Yeah. Hey. So I just want to say real fast, I love the pick. I'm not really following the different players that closely, but as a general rule, I'd like big or bulky players to smaller players, and based upon that, I think we got another hog in town, so that makes me happy. Hopefully he'll pan out and do real well. I do think that our next pick, not really knowing the players, we need to pick up some quick player or a real fast player. I think that we're filling out our team. It looks like for years and years, Kevin, we talk about depth for a team, and it looks like we're finally have some depth to this team, but from way years ago, we always are looking for more depth. So speed at a secondary position or a wide receiver, probably more defensive back safety might be really nice, especially if he can return punts and kicks. So a player like that in the second round would be great. I do like the player from Miami, the tight end, because I don't watch too much college football, but either him or I would stay away from the running back from Ohio State just because I really enjoy watching Brian Robinson and would like to see him do well this year. So that's pretty much where I'm at. I'd either trade up for the tight end from Miami or look for the fastest player in the draft.
Arroyo is the tight end for Miami. I don't
round.
know where if they'll end up trading up or need to. I actually like Mason Taylor more than Arroyo, but thanks for the call. Appreciate it. Yeah, thanks,
Thank you.
Mark.
Take care.
Yep. Let's go to Jason and Laurel. Jason, thanks so much for holding. Go ahead.
Hi, Kev. Thanks for taking the call. I'm in absolute love with the pick, and I'm confused how anybody couldn't be. First of all, most important priority is keeping JD5 healthy. This helps with that. It makes our line bigger, younger. He's versatile. Coleman's versatile, so you got some guys you can move around. The other thing, too, is all this talk about defense, and I get it. I mean, nobody's really happy with the total defensive product we had. But, guys, come on. We played defense by playing keep away with the ball last year until our run game broke down in some spots. This helps our run game, which helps our defense.
No doubt.
And the guy is a gazelle, can run downfield. He's going to block. He's a big guy. I tell you that I like Ian's calls with you. I love hearing you guys go back and forth. I, too, very much benefit the doubt. I love that Newmark and AP, they're quality guys. They're polite. They keep everything to the grab. They're making good decisions. When these two guys finally decide to draft somebody that might have a butt or once upon a time he made the mistake, I'm going to have 100% confidence that they've done their due diligence, and that was just one mistake that the player made. I mean, I love how they're shaping.
Well, they're going to make more than one. They're going to make
going.
more than one mistake. You know, the best of the best make more mistakes in the draft and miss more often than they hit. But I'm with you. Like I the benefit of the doubt that I've had is it started with, well, what this is so much better than what we used to have. B, now it's that we've seen that they're a professionally run organization. They have smart people making these decisions. They have, by the way, good people making these decisions. We didn't have that before. I'm all on board with what they're doing, but it does not mean they're going to be perfect because they won't be. Thanks. Appreciate the call, Jason. Let's go to quickly. Yeah.
I think they're going to draft a running back too, but I would be surprised if other than a running back, it's all defense from here on out, just for role players and depth. That's what I think we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, they have to get better defensively. The question is whether or not they feel like they already have gotten better defensively. That's what we don't know. Like I've said a million times, defense is incredibly variable year to year. We don't know that they don't believe that Dorrance Armstrong's finish to the season is going to be in year 2 in the same defensive system, a dominant kind of a season, sack-wise, run-stop-wise, that Johnny Newton isn't going to step up big, that Kinlaw isn't going to be the size that they've been looking for in the versatility, that Wise can't get after the passer, that Jordan McGee isn't going to be a major new addition in terms of the playmakers, that Will Harris is everything that Jeremy Chin was and more for less money. There's a lot that they know that we don't know. I think the biggest question mark really is Lattimore. Like, is Lattimore going to be a top-level outside corner for them in 2025? Because that will be very important. And then, before you even get to that, you got to be better stopping the run. 301-230-0980, 301-230-0980. Gary in Upper Marlboro has been on hold for a while. Gary, thanks. Go ahead.
Hi, Kevin. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
Listen, I like the player, Kevin, but I am still very, very shaky on the defensive side of the ball. Okay, I heard what you just said. I am more in the bank with Ian about what he said about Adam Peters. Adam Peters, I think, is decent in finding established players, like in free agency. But the jury is still out on him on the draft, okay? And I don't care what anybody says, outside of Sainristil and, of course, Jaden, every one of those draft picks are still question marks, okay? Every single one of them. And when everyone was saying, I think we need to trade down and get more picks, I did not want to trade out of the first round because I didn't want to give Adam the ability to bungle the second and third and fourth round picks that it looks like he's done already. And I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt.
You can't say that after one season. Most rookies don't contribute in their rookie season. You've got to give it 3 seasons before you can really weigh in on a draft. They had the offensive rookie of the year, and they had a guy that finished 5th or 6th in defensive rookie of the year voting. So the fact that they had a guy that had the kind of rookie season that Sainristil had, and the kind of year that Jaden had, you gotta give some of these other guys a chance. Sinnott didn't have many reps. McCaffrey actually played well in terms of his get open ability. They just didn't throw it to him enough. I just think it's way too early to judge last year's draft. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying it's too early to have a strong opinion about the 2024 draft.
And what I'm saying is, you said 2 or 3 years. Well, Washington doesn't have 2 or 3 years. We're trying to get a championship when Jaden is on his rookie contract. That's what everybody's talking about. Okay,
I understand.
That's what everybody's talking about. And
how do you know year 2 for these guys isn't going to be a breakout year? How do you know Luke McCaffrey or Jordan McGee isn't in store for a major breakout year to go with Sainristil, who starts pushing for a Pro Bowl, and Jaden gets his second? Can you, just that alone, 4 out of 9 would be a massive hit rate in an NFL draft.
But we don't have.
And by the way, they've got a contributor and a starter in Coleman at guard. Worst case.
We don't have any evidence, Kevin, that these guys are going to be hits. We don't have any evidence of it. You said McCaffrey was getting open. Okay. But what I'm saying is there are plenty of teams who get production, get some production out of their rookies, second, third, fourth, and fifth rounders. It's all around the league.
Not always in the first year, though. Rarely in the first year.
No, I said rookie. I said rookies. No.
Okay.
There are teams that Dallas, in our own division, Dallas has had some really good years with their rookies up and down their drafts. Okay, people are taking shots at what they did.
Let me ask you it this way. Your projection right now, when we look back on the 2024 draft in 2027, how do you think we're going to evaluate a draft that included Jaden Daniels, Mike Sainristil, and Brandon Coleman at a minimum? Okay, 2 Pro Bowl caliber players and probably a full-time starter at a guard spot along their offensive line out of the 9 players they picked.
The entire draft? I mean, you're saying.
I'm just
I mean,
saying.
You're saying. I mean,
I'm not mentioning any other
I'm not
players.
willing
All they would need is one more player to have a hit rate that is at a very acceptable level to contribute.
Well, we had 9 draft picks
Yes,
last year.
nine.
And you're saying 2 Pro Bowlers?
I'm just saying, in 3 years, how do you think you're going to evaluate it? Right now, what's your gut?
My gut is Sanders still, and Jaden will be.
And that's it?
Jaden will be a perennial Pro Bowler. I'm not sure about Sanders still.
Okay.
I'm not sure about him. I think he's going to be a decent player, but I didn't see anything that says he's going to be a lockdown corner.
Okay.
I mean, I think we're looking at this as too many rose-colored glasses. Okay, and my point about
maybe
Adam
I'm just
Peters,
what I would say to you, Gary, and we're talking hypothetical and projected down the road because you can't evaluate it now. But what I would say to you is the 2024 draft will always be viewed as a very successful draft, A, because of Jaden Daniels, most importantly, but B, because they got a starting corner, who, by the way, had versatility. They got a starting guard, and they probably got a starting D tackle and maybe another, linebacker in Jordan McGee, who they love. If you hit on 4 out of those 9 picks 3 years from now, major contributors, it was a wildly successful draft, especially when you consider JD at the top. That's what I would say. I think it's leaning in the direction of we're going to evaluate it in a very positive way in 3 years. But you might be right. Maybe Sanders still falls apart. Newton's a bust. Coleman can't play. McCaffrey can't get open. And JD ends up being the only good thing out of the draft. Time will tell. I'm just saying you can't make that determination today. But I gave you my lean and you gave me your lean. Let's check in 2027 on the draft. Thanks, Gary, as always. JYD, Rob, Sam, DC, Alex, stay on hold. We'll do a couple of more calls. Lenell will jump on with us. We'll get his thoughts. Ben will have all of the information from the various general managers, agents, et cetera, that he's checked in with, and we'll look ahead to tonight and mock that out when we talk to Ben at 12. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980 and the Team980.com. Josh Conerly Jr. was the pick late last night. First round moved pretty quickly. It was actually pleasant to watch. It was a Shadur Sanders show on ESPN. Kuiper, man, he is all in on Shadur Sanders. He basically is calling out all these teams, whether it's Tennessee, New Orleans, Pittsburgh, the Giants, as making a massive mistake. Will be really interesting to see where Shadur goes tonight. Cleveland's got, picks that trade at the top of the first round, with Jacksonville trading up to get Travis Hunter. So Cleveland now has 2 of the first 4 picks in the second round. New Orleans has the 8th pick in the second round. Pittsburgh does not have a second round pick. So we'll see if they try to trade back up to get him. Pittsburgh's situation is the most interesting because they traded for DK Metcalf and they've got George Pickens, and they literally do not have a quarterback right now other than Mason Rudolph. So they must be banking on Aaron Rodgers playing. All right, DC, thanks for holding. Go.
Great day, Kevin, man.
What's up, DC?
The callers today been on point, whether it's opposed but I want to answer all of those questions. We drafted our quarterback for the next 10 to 15 years last year with our first round draft pick. He was the best quarterback in that draft, and he's arguably top 2 quarterbacks in the league, or 3 quarterbacks in the league. This year, we drafted someone that can protect him the whole time he's here, and he's ready to win now because he made it to the NFC Championship. So we got a left tackle to protect him right now. So how can you say the organization is making bad choices or bad picks when we know the Hogs is what led us to our championship? And we also know that the guy is ready to win now. So why would you wait to protect him when he's doing as much as he can with less of a line? What is he going to do with a line that is helping him?
Well, I'm with you on this, but I think the playing devil's advocate, it would be you basically were unstoppable offensively last year with the line that you had. And they were at times unstoppable, but your issue was defensively, you couldn't get off the field enough. You couldn't stop the run. And ultimately in games against Philadelphia, you got beat up at the line of scrimmage. They got beat up at the line of scrimmage against Dallas. Both games, they got beat up at the line of scrimmage against New Orleans. That would be devil's advocate, but I'm for best player available. They clearly felt this guy was best player available. And the net takeaway is, you got a guy that is going to fill a position that you probably felt like you needed filled because Coleman's more of a guard, as he was for much of the time at TCU. And you're investing in protecting the number 1 asset in your organization, Jaden Daniels. I can't complain about it either.
We still have the second round to pick up a DN, and there's plenty of DNs left. Like half the DNs that we talked about, and I love that you did, Kevin, I do want to give you a credit. You did say, don't be surprised if we draft an O-Lineman last week. I don't know if it was Thursday or Friday or whatnot, but we drafted the O-Lineman that no one thought of, but it's who the coach wanted, who the GM agreed with. And the first thing I looked at after he was drafted was his RAS, because I've been hearing the RAS score, and they think highly of that. And then he only gave up 3 sacks in 1,000 snaps. Man, we got
Gave
one.
up no pressures against Abdul Carter in the Big Ten title game. Pretty impressive.
Come on, Kevin. Let's go. Time to get back to the Hogs, man.
Good job.
Thank you, brother.
Appreciate it. Let's go to Alex in Silver Spring. Alex, go ahead.
Hey, Kevin. Thanks for taking my call.
Thanks for holding, Alex.
Yeah, no problem. Hey, Max, thanks for throwing me in the queue. When you were staying up late watching videos, did you see Mike Green dog walking him at the Senior Bowl? I'm sure you did. We could have had him led the nation in sacks, or Donovan Ezeraku, only half a sack lower. I appreciate Ian and Gary's call. I will ease up on Peters here a little bit. I do think I did not like Johnny Newton initially when we drafted him. I was screaming and shouting like I was last night. He looks good. Mikey Sanders still. Saban said he was the best pound-for-pound player in the draft. That's unquestionable. I think Luke McCaffrey will be a very competent slot. I like Jordan Maggie. I love Dom Hampton. No one's talking about Jean Baptiste in the 7th round out of Notre Dame.
I know they like him.
I like him a lot. I know you talk about him a lot, but Kevin, everyone fell on their face. First play from scrimmage, NFC Championship, Saquon Barkley to the house. Does Josh Conerly Jr. play defense? Is he going to stop the Eagles from putting up 55 points on us? I like how everyone calls in. They want to talk about their football knowledge and say, oh, let the football guys. Yeah, I understand. That goes without saying. These guys' jobs are to pick football players. We don't need to say that over and over and have that stated. I'm giving Peters the benefit of the doubt. I thought beyond reproach was a little too much. However, I'm benefit of the doubt. Stopping Saquon Barkley. It's not stopping Saquon Barkley. You didn't go Nicky Manwari, Maxwell Harrison. There were so many defensive players. Even Will Johnson. You could have made up for not drafting Christian Gonzalez in 2022, which made me want to find Ron Rivera in public and berate him. But the point is this team, Lattimore, and no one's talking about this. The last thing I'll say before I say I want to do tonight, all the assets we gave up for Laramie Tunsil, and you turn around and you draft this guy at the end of the first round, he wasn't the best player available. You'll have Lenell on in 2 minutes here. I talked to Lenell last night. He liked Josh Simmons out of Ohio State more. So he clearly wasn't the best player available. And tonight, as far as I'm concerned,
because Lenell liked Josh Simmons more than Conerly Jr. I'm supposed to say, well, clearly he wasn't the best. Conerly wasn't the best player available on an offensive line analysis. Come on.
Is he going to? If Cosme was even injured, would he even have been the pick? I understand offensive line depth and rotations are important.
Yes.
I understand they're important. That's fine.
And by the way, nobody took Mike Green. Nobody took Mike Green. Nobody took Will Johnson in the first round. Why do you think that was?
Because we all know what happened with Mike Green in high school and college. He is not.
We don't know what was uncovered through the due diligence about Mike Green at Marshall. Clearly, that guy, the talent he had, something is not right. And Will Johnson,
Ezeraku is a commander, and he's going to be gone.
You just talked about Saquon Barkley and stopping the run. Ezeraku's 245 pounds. He's a pass rusher. He's not a run stopper.
Turn on the tape. Turn on the tape.
I did turn on the tape. I love Ezeraku as a pass rusher. He's 245. He wouldn't play for you on first down.
That's fine. He's just as heavy as Micah Parsons, only an inch shorter. I just he
plays a different position in many ways. They wouldn't move Ezeraku around like they moved Micah Parsons around.
Okay, and they enjoy watching the Eagles lift the Lombardi again.
They've got opportunities tonight to help their defense. I am with you on, I want more defense. I want them to be better on defense. I'm not with you on saying that there's no chance on their board that Josh Conerly was the best player available, because I think he was. And I have
Cliff left a note on the desk. That's why he was taken, because Cliff left a note on the desk.
Oh, come on. Do you really believe that? Do you really believe that, Alex? You think Kingsbury walked in and said, please, left tackle, and all of a sudden it was, the scouts and the front office, and you had, you had Adam Peters saying, oh, my God, hadn't thought of him, but Cliff wants him. Let's do it. You're out of your mind.
Well,
I can tell you right now, the organization loved the player. Loved the player. I didn't know it.
I'm sure they did. I'm sure they did. He won't stop.
No, you just said Kingsbury loved the player, and that's what got him got him drafted last night. I got to roll. I want to get two calls in here real quickly.
All right, Kevin,
let's go to. Thanks for the call, Rob in DC. Rob, go ahead.
What's good, Kevin? I'm gonna go ahead and defend you real quick. Look, I know a lot of guys are tripping, but I do watch a bunch of film. I actually work with a sports agency. So when you get with Josh Conerly, you're getting a blue chip caliber tackle. This guy was an All-American in high school. He was the number 3 tackle in the nation. Went to Oregon on a stacked O-line. Played with Bo Nix. He's played a lot of football.
Yep.
And when you look at what we have and where we're going, we don't have time to go through with prospects. We need short things, and this was a short pick. It was a safe pick, a short pick, and you never can have too many linemen. One of the biggest issues he has, he needs to play bigger. He needs to play heavier. Who better to learn that from than Laramie Tunsil? So basically, you think about, you got Laramie Tunsil for 2 or 3 years. You're basically doing the same thing Green Bay does with quarterbacks. When Tunsil leaves, you have somebody to slide in and be the stalwart left tackle. The crazy thing about it all, everybody's talking this. The only thing that was logical other than drafting the offensive tackle yesterday was the trade back. I mean, you look at the positions that was there. Maybe you could take the safety out of South Carolina, but guys, like you said, Mike Green fell for a reason. There's a reason why Mike Green fell. And you look at the depth that they have on the defensive players. The board is still stacked with a bunch of defensive players for today and tomorrow.
Sure.
And myself personally, I'm trading back. Even today, I'm trading back. I'm trying to get as many picks as possible because the board is still stacked. And outside of that, I do have just a random question for you. And this is because I've been hearing you talk about this for 2 or 3 weeks. Everyone keeps comparing Genty to all these great running backs. I heard the blasphemous comment of comparing him to Emmett yesterday. Why isn't nobody saying what I see? This
Comparing
man
him to
is
who yesterday? Who did I compare him to?
Emmett Smith. Emmett Smith.
I didn't compare him to Emmett Smith.
No, you didn't. You didn't. I think it was not Mel Kiper. It was who the hell was on? I forgot who it was. But why no
By
one
the way,
sees? I see
in
Trent.
thinking about it, it's not a terrible comparison in terms of style, in terms of the
Oh,
balance
you're
that
crazy.
he has.
You're crazy. He's Trent Richardson. He's that's who he is. I say he's gonna have the same career as Trent Richardson. He's Trent Richardson. He's literally Trent Richardson. That's who he is.
He's not Trent Richardson.
You look
Trent
at,
Richardson wasn't that height, was he?
Yes,
wasn't
he is.
Trent Richardson
5'9".
He was 5'9". I like Genty a lot. I like Genty a lot. In fact, the comp I gave in terms of the real positive rose-colored glasses comp is LT. I think Danian Tomlinson in the build and the style of play is similar.
Oh no, that's crazy, Cap. That's crazy.
Okay, but where were you going with this? Sorry.
Oh yeah, so what I'm saying as far as evaluation and stuff like that, we are in a solid spot, in a solid position today to trade back and get more depth. I do like Mason Taylor as well, coming out the tight end out of LSU. But I mean, honestly, we are playing with house money right now. We got the quarterback. So everything else is just an addition to what we're building out. I mean, our defense does need to get worked on. We could use corners.
We can't, but remember, and I got to run. I got to get to a break. But house money is different than a much better position than we've ever been in, because Kansas City's got arguably the greatest quarterback of this generation, and he'll go down as one of the all-time greats. And they need more up front to win. They probably need another playmaker to win, even with Patrick Mahomes. All right, Lenell's going to jump on with me next. We'll get his thoughts. It sounds like, based on a caller who talked to Lenell last night, that he's not a big fan of Conerly Jr., so we'll find out why next. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980 and the Team980.com.
All right, last night was a big night for the Washington Commanders. They stick and pick at 29 despite having multiple offers to move off the pick. They select Josh Conerly Jr., the offensive tackle out of Oregon. He graded an 83.6 pass protection grade from PFF and a 78.3 overall. The Giants drafted Abdul Carter at number 3. Then they traded up with the Texans for 25 overall to draft Jackson Dart, the quarterback from Ole Miss. The Cowboys reached up for Alabama guard Tyler Booker, and the Eagles traded up with the Chiefs to select Jahad Campbell at 31. The Nats wrapped up the Beltway battle with a loss to the Orioles 2-1. They will take on the Mets tonight in Nats Park on the Team 980. To the ice, the Caps are looking to take a 3-0 series lead at the Bell Center. They were joined by Alexi Protas on the flight, who missed both games so far due to a cut on his foot. You could see him tonight or Sunday. This update is sponsored by the Team 980 YouTube page. Just open the app, type in the Team 980, and hit subscribe. Kevin Sheehan is live from 10 to 1 and Craig Hoffman from 4 to 7. Don't forget to like the stream and turn on notifications to stay up to date on all things DC sports. And that's what's trending.
Ben, coming up in 15 minutes, we'll talk about tonight and look back to last night, but Lenell's jumping on with me right now. Lenell and Denton will be doing a show tonight on 980 in the we'll carry the draft on 980, but on YouTube, and I will be appearing on that with them for a period of time. Lenell joins us right now. So I just had a caller call in and say that he was talking to you last night and that you don't like the pick. So go ahead, Josh Conerly Jr.
First of all, good morning. That's not at all what I said. We were actually talking about them going offensive tackle right before when I saw that Josh Simmons, the tackle out of Ohio State, was on the board. That was like my initial first thought is, well, if you were going to go offensive tackle, which I continued to believe, throughout, this process was still very much in play. Despite them bringing in, Laramie Tunsil, I still thought if the tackle they liked was there at 29, it wouldn't prevent them, from taking them. Very obvious, though, why they preferred Conerly over Simmons, right? Simmons had, a little bit of a draft slide. Obviously, he ends up in Kansas City. And
the draft slide because of the injury, more likely than not.
Right. So that's really was the big reason why he was able to fall. If he was fully healthy and had a full bill of health, a clean bill of health, he's probably offensive tackle one in the entire draft class. So that was the reason I was infatuated by him. But with Conerly, I don't think you can go wrong at all. The thing I love about him is what he is going to be asked to do here in the NFL. He majored in, at Oregon over the past 2 seasons. They throw a lot of screens in terms of him being able to get out on the second level. Could you imagine, him going out and taking out the corner and then his Deebo Samuel running up his back, 60 yards for a touchdown? Like, that's what I envision when I look at Josh Conerly. The other thing, too, Kevin, that got me, whoever, has gotten him ready to be, an NFL player over the past couple of years, I don't know if it's a personal trainer or the folks at Oregon, he's like super technically sound based off of everything you read and everything you watch about, how the kid plays. So I think that's awesome as well. But all of a sudden, I think big picture, you have now turned your offensive line into a super strength. Now, there are obviously some, moves to be made up front in terms of like position switches that we're not, all the way privy to. I would think that Conerly bumps out to your right tackle. This officially kicks Brandon Coleman to the inside to be a guard. And then this is what excites me. The battery of your offensive line, when Cosme is back healthy, that guard-center guard combo is going to be Brandon Coleman, Tyler Biadasz, and then Sam Cosme. That's going to be one of the best in the National Football League. And then, oh, by the way, right out the gate, I want to see how long it takes Conerly to be NFL pro, Kevin, because he's got some issues with play strength, and you never know how long that takes to get remedied. But from a pass protection standpoint, if he's as advertised, you're going to have one of the best pass blocking tackle duos in the NFL right off the rip. So I really like the pick. I think it's all about, obviously doing what you can to maximize Jaden Daniels. And I'll never forget that audible, gasp that you heard when he, got crunched back against Atlanta. That was a scary moment. You want to keep him upright as much as possible. I think this pick does just that.
Who did you think they were going to take when they were on the clock, given some of the possibilities? Because there were plenty of them.
So I was surprised that Mike Green was still there. I think there is some real concern about the off-the-field stuff, because that's the only explanation I can think of as to why he would slide out of the first round completely when you lead college football in sacks for a year. But from a production standpoint, over his time at Marshall, like this year was kind of an anomaly. He really burst onto the scene and exploded. But I wanted Donovan Ezraku, the edge out of Boston College. Like that was my, edge that I wanted here from the start of this process, just because of what you already have, right? You brought in Dietrich Wise via free agency. Maybe he can start opposite Dorrance Armstrong on first and second down, and then on third down to start the season, your sub package, you unleash a guy like Donovan Ezraku. But obviously they passed on the edge rushers, Kevin. I continue to believe they passed on edge rusher, and people were tweaked and panicked on social media. I think it's hilarious. Somebody called into your show and said I didn't like the pick. I love the pick. And they were actually listening to what the hell we were
trust
saying.
Me, Lenell, it happens all the time. I have people call me and say, why did you like him? I'm like, I actually said the opposite on the show. People hear what they want to hear. But tell me, so I look, Green and Johnson were not
Will jump, yeah.
They were interesting possibilities, but the fact that they had slid all the way to 29 with their talent meant there were issues that teams were not going to spend a first-round pick on. So I was not expecting that. I was expecting potentially as a Rocco. I also thought corner was a possibility. I thought O-line was a possibility. I didn't guess Conerly, but I didn't know what they were going to do at 29. But I just thought it was interesting because if you had said to me 2 months ago, Mike Green's going to be available at 29, I would have said, that's your pick. But there's something wrong there. It's the stuff we don't get a chance to access that the rest of the league clearly. They spoke loudly on him. I thought he was the second best edge behind Abdul Carter in the draft, personally. Anyway, what do you want to see tonight?
It honestly, depends. I would love to see them turn 61 into, another pick so they're not one and done, after 61 tonight. So that would be the ideal situation for me. But what I was going to say is that the reason I think they ended up passing on those edges, Kevin, is this edge rush class, and we've been, talking about this defensive front in this class throughout the entire process. It's like a Baskin Robbins of edges. There are 32 different flavors, right? You can
running backs too.
Yes, indeed, which is why I was so against, taking one in round 1 or round 2, because that's not really where the value is at that position. But I think what it shows, Kevin, is their bucket of the other tier of edges, so to speak, they're very comfortable with, at 61, or if they can acquire another pick, later tonight. But the guys like David Walker out of Central Arkansas is like a guy I had circled, Kevin, 6'1", 263. Yeah. I think he's only dropped because he doesn't have the prototypical body type for that position. He's James Harrison, though, is how I would describe the way that he plays and how physical he is at the point of attack. I still think they can end up with Landon Jackson, the Arkansas kid. I've heard you talking about JTT, and I think he is like the ultimate commander, the edge out of Ohio State. And the thing I love about JTT, he plays his best when the lights are the brightest, so to speak.
Big game player.
Yes, indeed. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Kevin, I think they showed us last night in round 1, though, man. They're going to go best player available. Whoever they think is the top player on their board at that time, that's who they're turning in, with the pick. So I can say, what I'd like to see, right? We're all still thirsty for the edge. I think outside wide receiver gets interesting here, depending on how that run goes here today. But receiver, I don't think running back happens, today. I don't think it should happen, Kevin, in the second round or the third round. I think it's more of a day 3 type of pick, just because there's so much depth at the position in this class, man. So I don't know which way they're going to ultimately go. It's kind of a cop-out answer, but I think probably, edge, corner, wide receiver. If a tight end slides, Kevin, I thought, Mason Taylor was potentially in play last night, just because of, where it was and how folks are talking about him, towards the end of this process.
Is there a corner tonight that you like?
My guy's probably not going to be there, Kevin, but my whole thing is this. When you go out to the Senior Bowl and dominate, and think about what happened this year at the Senior Bowl, Kevin, that's where all of these wide receivers started to come onto the map. Jaden Higgins, Jalen Royals, Jack Beck from TCU. Our guy, Azariah Thomas, the 6'2" outside corner from Florida State, went up to Mobile and shut all of them down. So I'm like, yeah, bring me him. Prototypical size for a Dan Quinn corner. And then I love a guy that was in the ACC and didn't go up against a bunch of decorated receivers. He goes out to Mobile and shuts down guys from the SEC, the Big 10, the Big 12. So he can really play. Doesn't have the long speed, Kevin, but at 6'2", 200 pounds, can move really well for that size. That would be my ideal corner, in this class.
Yeah. There are a couple players. I think Darian Porter would totally fit their whole, RAS emphasis, not to mention, the fact that he does everything. He's blocked 5 kicks in college. And if there's a wide receiver, if I told you they picked a wide receiver tonight, who would it be?
Depends on how the board shakes out. I know they were really in on the Ole Miss kid, Trey Harris, a guy that can come in, right, Kevin, to be an outside guy from right away.
6'3" or whatever, yeah.
Yeah, I think he plays faster even than what he ran. Every time you're watching Ole Miss highlights, it's him running down the field by himself. He gets, high points to the football well at the point of attack, too. I just think he adds a different body type, a different physical profile to the wide receiver room. That would kind of be my kind of rule of thumb here for wideout. Now, if you like a smaller guy, you know, like a Jalen Royals out of Utah State, you go ahead and do that. But I think that they need that power forward still in the room, right, so to speak, Kevin, that can, you know, be a red zone threat, win the 50-50 balls. Noah Brown currently kind of, you know, serves as the tallest wide receiver in the room, if I'm not mistaken. So somebody that's, you know, of that profile physically.
Is Noah Brown taller than Luke McCaffrey? He might
I think
be.
they're both 6'2".
Yeah. All right. Great job. On tonight with Lenell 7 to 10, right, on YouTube?
Yes, indeed. Me and Devin.
I'll talk.
Awesome.
What did I say? You and him.
You said it right. We'll see you at about 7:15. I hear.
I'll talk to you tonight. Thanks.
All good. Thanks, Al.
Lenell Willingham, everybody. Ben Standig next. Ben Standig's with us, as he is every Monday and Friday, and a little bit more during draft week. They selected last night Josh Conerly Jr., tackle, Oregon, at number 29 overall. Adam Peters said they were not going to move back, even though there were plenty of opportunities to do so if Conerly Jr. was on the board. At Ben Standig, read him at The Athletic, listen to his podcast, Standig Room Only. So, not necessarily a player that we talked a lot about. What was your reaction?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's a guy that I talked about and wrote about a bit here and there, but, you know, you get caught up in all the, you know, there's so much going on, and, you know, when they're picking 29 and what are the scenarios, and you still know who's going to be on the board or whatever, but the idea of taking offensive tackle is something I definitely talked about. I'm pretty sure you and I did, and I talked about it with others over the last few days, because it just makes sense. You know, the Laramie Tunsil move was a you know, seismic move and a sign that they really felt they needed to upgrade the offensive line. And then so Brandon Coleman moves to right tackle, and it's like, okay, cool, Brandon Coleman is the right tackle. Where I came at a couple, 2 or 3 weeks ago was like, well, wait a minute. On the one hand, they've already moved him once, and it's not like they were kind of vague about what his role was going to be even when they did it. So sure, if they do nothing else, Brandon Coleman right tackle, that could be interesting without question. But if there's somebody there in the first or second round, well, that player would, in theory, would have been picked higher than where Coleman was. So why wouldn't that person potentially be an upgrade at what is an incredibly important unit, the offensive line? And then when I looked at, got took like a 30,000 view look of the draft boards, and our guy Dane Brugler, he had Josh Conerly number 23 overall, but he had him as like his fourth offensive tackle, and he basically had 6 offensive tackles in his top like 26 or something like that. And then the 8th best offensive tackle was 79 on his board. In other words, if you wanted to get one, you had to go early. And if you look what happened last night. There were 8 offensive linemen in total that went in the first round. It sounds like that a lot of teams were calling to trade up to try to get ahead of, well, not necessarily ahead of Washington. I don't know if they knew that Washington was doing that, but they were trying to get into the first round to get Conerly. I think even one of my mock draft scenarios, I had a deal where the Bears, who we know need a left tackle, and thinking they wouldn't get one in the first round, but they have a good ammunition on day 2 that they could trade up to Washington. And that's thinking, hey, would the Commanders want to trade down, with that mindset, get more picks? So I even was making those types of trades for like a Conerly in mind. At the end of the day, though, the offensive tackle class is pretty thin, and Peters essentially acknowledges yesterday when I asked about it, whereas the edge class, which obviously has been talked about the most, runs a lot deeper. And there are guys that were still on the board today. There'll be guys on early day 3 who will be considered pretty good edge rushers. It's just that because there's so many guys at that spot that are considered viable. On the flip side, the offensive tackles and the offensive linemen got pushed up yesterday. I mean, seeing guards go as high as they did is an indication of that as well.
Right.
So, I think it's a combination of playing the board, and then obviously, look, clearly they like the talent. They didn't, you can't just force the position. That's where you get into trouble. They like the talent. Conerly was a 2-year starter at left tackle. He had some, really good evaluations. I've seen pre-draft, athletic. He did a good job. Peters pointed out against a head-to-head matchup against Abdul Carter, the Penn State defensive end who went 3rd. So there's a lot to like. I think with this pick, and at the end of the day, the number one priority has got to be help boost Jaden Daniels, and this is in line for doing that.
Yeah. The people that don't like it, let me just tell you, if Josh Conerly doesn't start like early in the season, and let's just say Wiley does start and Coleman's the guard or whatever, Coleman starts, that's not a reason to freak out. Like, often these guys take a little bit of time. He's not going to play left tackle. He's going to play a side in which he played at the Senior Bowl, but didn't actually play in games that mattered. So there could be an adjustment. I'm just throwing it out there. And you made a really good point, about just the idea that maybe Conerly and Simmons were the last of kind of the tackles before you probably were going to have to wait a little bit on tackle. And so 8 offensive linemen went in the first round, 3 guards, 3 true guards, went in the first round. That's definitely unusual, I think, although more people are emphasizing interior offensive linemen. Just out of curiosity, because we were texting back and forth, but I don't think we did it right before the pick last night. Who did you think they were going to? Were you thinking Scorton was a chance? What did you think was going to happen when they were on the clock? And there were a lot of opportunities, including 2 guys who had fallen in Will Johnson and Mike Green.
Yeah, I mean, how do I say? So I think there's like sort of 2 parts of my brain. There's the mock draft. Oh, this guy's rated higher than this guy, and hey, we talked a lot about edge rushers, so my brain is sort of going there. But like the part of my brain that says, how do you maneuver a draft, kind of went through what we just discussed in terms of like the positional values. Like there's just some positions that are just going to be, harder to find later, and to maximize the full value of the draft. Like I will say, and I wish I had sort of leaned more into this. Every time I did a mock draft, because I always do 2 rounds because they want to get a feel for what else is behind, the first round. So, for this idea of where the strengths and weaknesses are, where the tiers are, things like that. Every time I went to the second round, if I took defensive end first and went to the second, not that there weren't some potentially good players, and not that whatever I was thinking in terms of player order was accurate completely, but I was always struggling more to find the best fit, I thought, for the team. Whereas if I went any other position in the first round, tackle, running back, or whatever, the second round pick always felt better because I would typically go with an edge rusher and, you know, be like, okay, that guy, you know, I've heard good things like the UCLA defensive end, Femi Oladejo was a guy that I always kind of I always kind of gravitated towards him, and there's a few other guys. So I wasn't sitting there. We were waiting in the auditorium, waiting for the pick to get announced and talk to the player, and I had to write stuff. So my brain I wasn't sitting there on my couch thinking what's going to happen. But you know, as much as we talked about Ezeraku and Scorton and some others, this again was a draft where these guys could go 19, 20, or they could fall into the 40s. This is just how this year is, and you know, the first round, by the way, really played out that way. I would say that honestly, the pre-draft buzz, so to speak, was way off this year in terms of like the order of players and like the teams, like what teams would potentially do. But part of that is because of the unsettled nature of this class. Like there was just no consensus on anything in terms of where certain players were valued and you know, and so on. So yeah, I mean, it was just hard to figure out what they were going to do, but you know, we knew the obvious positions, and to me, tackle was kind of one of them.
Yeah, there were two things that I thought about when the first round ended last night. Number one was I thought I should have considered more about the trade-up opportunity for a quarterback being before the Rams pick, so with Houston, because there was a lot of conversation about the Rams selecting a quarterback, and so that was the spot, not 29, not below the Rams, if you wanted Jackson Dart or Shedeur Sanders, and the Giants went right in front of the Rams, and then the Rams promptly traded to the pick because I have a feeling that they were probably interested in Jackson Dart. And then the other thing, too, in listening to Adam Peters, is that Kansas City was always going to be in the market for an O-lineman if there was a good one on the board. And to your point, if you didn't take a tackle, you know, early, especially after we saw 8 linemen go off the board, 3 guards, 5 tackles by the end of the first round anyway. And my sense is, and I'm wondering if you feel the same way, when he said we had opportunities to move back, but we weren't assured that Conerly would be there, Kansas City had him teed up at 31. They then traded back because they didn't, you know, with Philly traded up one spot to get Campbell. I'm not so sure if they had both stayed in the same spot, they wouldn't have gotten the player that they wanted. But do you think that that's the team that he was probably eyeballing as if we were to move into the second round, pick up another pick, we lose Conerly to Kansas City?
I think he was concerned if they traded out, the team that they traded with would take Conerly. I mean, like there were people. You know, people didn't necessarily know what Washington was looking to do. It was, you know, they're pretty stealthy. But yeah, no. So again, because of this rush, you know, of linemen, that, you know, this is what teams were looking to do. I mean, I definitely wrote about it and talked about it on my podcast, and probably again with you, that like, sure, we all talk about, hey, if there's quarterbacks there, that's how teams trade up, whatever. But when I started to look at the board and seeing the depth or the lack thereof at tackle, my tune changed to both quarterback and offensive tackle. And like whenever I was doing my mock drafts, in where I would come up a scenario with trading down, including some of the ones I put on the Athletic, it was never to a team. Well, maybe I shouldn't say that. It was never to a team for quarterback. It was always for offensive tackle. It was for the the Browns or the Bears, or teams like that, because you know, either Shedeur was going to go earlier, or like if like the Giants. Like I know Adam Peters said the other day he's not afraid to make trades within the division, and maybe he wouldn't have been afraid of Jackson Dart. But like, you don't trade it with a team in your division who's going for a quarterback. That will haunt you if that guy works out more than another position. So the Giants and Washington were never going to make a trade, right? So who's making a trade to trade up for Washington? It would have to be somebody wanting likely a different position, and that position would. The only other one I saw that made sense was offensive tackle, because defensive end, there's still tons of guys out there. So yeah. So when 3 tackles went the first 9 picks, I mean, I think that also helps set the stage. It's not like they got pushed back and therefore maybe then Conerly is there in the second round, you know, that type of deal.
Yeah, I mean, there was a bit of an expectation, certainly, on Campbell and Membu going in the top, 7 or 8. I don't know if Kelvin
But like
Banks.
but yeah,
Yeah.
he got there late this last week. Again, it's always important to remember, and there's no real such thing as risers and fallers. All that is really happening is the public, which is, and that includes the draft analysts we all talk about, they are miles behind the teams. Like, at the end of the day, they don't know about medicals. They don't know about necessarily all the background checks. And if the people who were on the outside talking about the draft were as good as some may think, they would be in the buildings, not talking about the buildings. So it's just people catching.
Yeah, people really were hitting at 75% on their wagers. They wouldn't be selling the picks. They'd actually be retired somewhere. Real quickly, though, before we get to tonight, what really surprised you, if anything, about the first round? And I understand what you just said. We don't know anything, and that's true.
Sure.
But I have one thing that surprised me. What surprised you?
Well, I mean, this isn't my answer. I mean, the Travis Hunter trade, just like, wow, okay, that's just a bold trade for both sides. But Atlanta trading back in the first round for James Pierce, even if you said to me, hey, they're comfortable with whatever concerns or questions there might be, but they love the talent, okay. But to give up a first-round pick, like the Giants didn't give up a first-round pick for Jackson Dart, a quarterback.
Exactly.
To give up a first-round pick, look, and the crazy thing is the Falcons, they have needed pass rushers forever. Like last year, instead, they took a quarterback, and we know that whole story. So I just thought that was a bizarre one that they went for. They gave up a first-round pick, and that was the one to me. I was like, what the heck?
Yeah, I mean, look, for all we know, like you were saying, the due diligence and what it uncovers, maybe Pierce Jr. was a much better situation than everybody had talked about going into it. That doesn't change the fact that you gave up a lot more to go up to a spot below the spot the Giants went up to draft a quarterback. Doesn't make any sense to me. That was the head scratcher. All right, let's focus on.
By the way, just quickly with Washington. So Peter said he was nervous about Conerly going off the board as high as the top 12 picks. That he was concerned, and obviously there were a lot of linemen. I think one thing that was probably a bit overlooked in general last night was the good fortune Washington had that the two trades right in front of them, Houston at 25 and the Rams at 26, were two teams that people were pegging for offensive line potentially. So Texans, everybody had that, and the Rams, it was sort of like they could. And the fact that those two teams traded out and the teams that came in went quarterback, pass rusher, may have been what ultimately gave Washington Conerly, because if those teams stay.
If Conerly had gone to, let's just say, Houston, who stayed at 25, who do you think the pick would have been for Washington at 29? Do you think he would have accepted the offers and traded back?
I would guess. I mean, I don't imagine it was like Conerly was the only guy that they were like completely confident that they would pick. But I mean, I feel like that the trade back, always feels like it's the way to go. It just depends on what we don't know what the trades are. But yeah, I would guess trade. If not, again, the pass rushers that we've talked about were there, and so probably that. But yeah, that's I just think that scenario really may have saved them if they wanted Conerly.
All right. So the fact that they took an offensive lineman and they haven't taken an edge, and there are a bunch of edges left, plenty that we've talked about over the last several weeks. What do you think happens tonight? First of all, do they stay at 61?
Well, if they want more picks, I think this is the one you have to trade down. Getting more picks is not just saying, oh, they got 2 extra 7s. I mean, 7th round picks are people too, but that's not typically where you're going to find the real contributors for a team. So if you want to do that, I think they got to trade out 61. And the good thing is in this draft, again, where the talent gap is pretty minimal, the first 100 or 150 picks, is that if they're in round 3, round 4, maybe early round 5, they'll still get people that will get a lot of praise and attention. Say, oh, this guy is legit. I mean, with defensive ends, there's so many guys. I think again, Dane Brugler had, I believe, 24 in his first 4 rounds. So it's not just that. That shows that there's guys who are going to get picked later here later today, tomorrow, that were worthy of being picked higher, but they just get pushed back because of depth. So, I would think if they stick and pick, I would say, edge rusher remains the most likely need, but, cornerback is there. And at some point I would still think they're going to get an offensive playmaker, but trading down to me would be, again, it's hard to say it's my best bet, but like that to me would seem to be what Peters wants the most, unless there's another prospect that they say, hey, if this guy's on the board, we have no choice but to take him.
Let's just say they stick at 61. Do you have somebody mocked to Washington at 61?
Well, now it gets tricky, right? It's one thing the first round, but things go off the rails when it comes to figuring out what teams are valuing now, or which players. But like just to name a few guys that we mentioned, some of these pass rushers, I would think that Ezeraku is off the board. I would guess that Scorton's off the board. I mentioned Oladejo from UCLA, somebody that I believe they've shown interest in. So I think, he would make sense. But, look, he was even a guy that was getting some, light first round buzz at various points. So he could be gone as well. I don't know that Benjamin Morrison, the cornerback from Notre Dame, is going to be there because he's one of these many cornerbacks that has had the top, again, possible first round buzz. But I think that's somebody to keep an eye on.
Yep.
I've talked before about Siobhan Ravel, the cornerback from East Carolina, first round talent, but he's older than the average rookie coming off an ACL. Maybe he slides a bit to that point. A random flyer I'll throw out here, this is on the offensive side, is TCU wide receiver Savion Williams. He's kind of like a bigger, faster, younger Deebo Samuel. So maybe that's ultimately a bit redundant, but I think that could be a really, really, really fun chess piece for a guy like Cliff Kingsbury to have. And I'll just throw in as a side piece, this guy is repped by Cliff Kingsbury's agent, which has nothing to do with what Adam Peters will do, but I'm just saying there's got to be even a little bit more of a insight into this player, who's probably more of a round 3 guy, but I think there's some possibilities there. And then this is what then when the best player available kicks in. If there's a safety that they like, if there's a even tight end, and I can start getting a little more into that. A defensive tackle. Defensive tackle may be the deepest position in this group, and while we wouldn't think of that as a need for necessarily 2025, beyond Johnny Newton, that room is very open next year. So that could be something they say, hey, the position value here is too good. Whether it's a guy that's a Shamar Turner, this was a Darius Alexander from Toledo. Like there's a few guys that I think could make sense. So again, it's I think trade down makes the most sense, but they'll have options across the board at all the positions.
What would make the fan base pull their hair out the most at 61? Another offensive lineman, clearly.
100%. I don't know. I mean, it's probably more along the lines of like somebody with a big name they've heard of is sitting there, and instead they take a player at another position or the same position that is less heralded, smaller school or just didn't play out, wasn't on your television every Saturday, something like that. I mean, look, I'm probably the wrong person to guess what's going to outrage the fan base, because I look at everything to me would be reasonable that they could attack almost any position. So I don't know what would be annoying, but something that's not a celebrated position and a player that doesn't get a lot of hype would probably be, but I would imagine would annoy people.
Yeah. All right. Good job. Appreciate it. I'll talk to you this weekend.
Yeah, man. See ya.
Ben Standig, everybody. Tonight will be interesting. The opportunity to trade back. Remember, they've got 61. That's at the end of the second round. So if you trade back, you're probably out of the second round, more likely than not. And what you're hopefully into is the third round, because you're not in that round right now. And then maybe you are also in the fourth round for a second time. With a trade back. The positions that I think they'll do well on Saturday or late tonight in round 3 are positions that we've talked a lot about: edge, corner, running back. and even wide receiver to a certain degree. But they may feel like their best opportunity is to trade back and take another tackle or another guard. That would just be funny at this point. I think we have a really good shot of a corner, edge, running back, wide receiver tonight with one of those picks. I'd be actually very surprised if it doesn't come from that group, although I guess I wouldn't rule out tight end. When we come back, a longtime NFL coach absolutely loves Josh Conerly. You'll hear what he said next. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980 and the Team980.com. Something Adam Peters said about Josh Conerly against the Big Ten's biggest opponents coming up in a second. But Mike Tice, do you remember Mike Tice? Mike Tice played many years in the NFL as a tight end, played in Seattle for several years, played here for a year, played in Minnesota, and then ended up becoming a head coach of the Vikings for about 4 seasons, and then stayed in the league as an OC and as an offensive line coach for years. By the way, if you didn't know this about Mike Tice, he was a quarterback in college at Maryland. He was a 6'7" quarterback in college at Maryland in the late 70s, early 80s, before Boomer Esiason arrived, and then became a tight end in the pros. Anyway, he was on a podcast that I think his son was doing last night for the draft. He loved Josh Conerly. This is a longtime offensive head coach, coordinator, and O-line coach, Mike Tice, talking about Josh Conerly.
Period. Number one offensive lineman in this draft for me. Again, I don't do it full time like everybody else does. I was given this special assignment, so I'm doing this special assignment. But
family favor.
I didn't get a chance to look it up, but whoever's an O-line coach at Oregon has done a tremendous job. This kid plays with great technique in all areas of the game: pass sets, run game, out in space, footwork, down blocks, hand usage. This guy has a lot of traits. When you have that many good traits, you're a first half of the first round player. You're because he has so many good traits. That to me makes this guy a premier offensive tackle in this year's draft. I really like this player. There's not a lot to not like about him, unless he's got some blemish or some acne that I don't know about.
There you go. About as high a praise from a former NFL, coach and player as you can get on Josh Conerly Jr. So there were a couple of other sound bites from Adam Peters that I wanted to play. The first one was just the idea that Ben talked about, and I don't know, maybe this was Ben's question. Sorry if I didn't know this going in, but Ben brought up the fact that, we had a run on offensive linemen in the first round, in part because there was a big drop off after, say, 7, 8, 9 guys, and then the rest of the tackles in particular. And he was asked about sort of the draft depth at that position and how it impacted the selection of Conerly Jr. Here's what he said.
Yeah, you always look at that. I think that's a good question. And yeah, we did think that, after Josh, there was going to be a little bit of a dip in terms of the guys that we really liked. And it wasn't a huge dip, but you're right. You do look across the board and say, okay, we can get these guys later. That shouldn't be the driver of your decision, but it also makes for, you to feel more comfortable about doing that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, you don't want it to be the full driver of your decision, because then you're really thinking more need, right? If you're like, well, the tackles aren't going to be there until the 4th or 5th round, there's such a big disparity. We got to take a tackle now. It should be about best player available, which it was. But if it's close with another best player available, and let's just say it came at the edge position, defensive end position, well, that position, according to everybody, is deep, and you're going to be able to get one in the 2nd round, the 3rd round, the 4th round in this draft. But Ben mentioned something that I didn't consider. I think the Chiefs were always looking at O-line, and Conerly Jr. had been actually mocked to Kansas City several times, which I went back and looked at after last night. But Ben suggested that maybe the trading partner would be the team that would have taken Conerly Jr. at 29. So Peters didn't want to risk it. He wanted to, stick where he was instead of accepting an offer to trade back and hope that he would be there. This was a question just about the overall emphasis on defense. And certainly I would say that most fans, most of us believed that going into this offseason, defense would be the focus. In the draft, defense might be a big part of the focus. Certainly an edge rusher, an edge run stopper. Here's what he said with respect to pressure in this draft to get defense.
I think it's just looking at our board and picking the highest player on our board. So I don't think there's any pressure to pick a defensive guy, except I'd feel bad for Joe Witt a little bit, but he was extremely supportive of this pick too. He's a great team guy, all jokes aside. But no, there's no real pressure to do that, to force a pick on the defensive side of the ball. It's just trying to pick the best commander for us.
There you go. They do need defense, but then again, maybe they feel like they did a lot in the offseason heading into the draft in free agency, and they like maybe what they have coming back. That's always something. We've talked about this for a while. The whole idea that last year's draft is already kind of in the books in terms of what they have, that's just false. Most rookie players don't make their big impact, if they're going to make a big impact, in their first season. So what they think of Johnny Newton and Jordan McGee and Dominique Hampton and Javonte Jean-Baptiste, who I was told a couple of times last year, they actually liked the player. And he got some run, remember, in some games during the course of the year. That draft, last year's draft, often ends up being the creator of your new contributors the next year. And the guys you draft this year then end up being more contributors the following year. Of course, you want your first rounder to be able to contribute right away. You'd like your second rounder to be able to contribute right away. In Washington's case last year, their first pick obviously contributed in a major way, and 2 of their 3 second-round picks contributed. Newton and, of course, Mikey Sanders still, who had an excellent rookie season. This was Adam Peters back on Josh Conerly, talking about the top talent that he faced during his college career, specifically in the Big Ten.
Yeah, that's a great question. That's something I failed to mention when I started the presser, but I think, one, the way he competed against Abdul Carter, he went toe to toe with Abdul Carter, who's the best pass rusher in the draft. He did really well, and he did really well against a lot of really good players. He, played at Ohio State twice, and they were getting the break speed off in the second game, and he was still competing to the very last second, and that showed a lot. And just so those types of things you see in them. When we have metrics where our R&D department does a great job of giving us metrics, how do they perform against high draftable players? And so he performed really high against high draftable players, and that lined up with what our eyes saw. And so those things make you really not just his skill, but the fact that he will go toe to toe with those guys. He's not going to freak out. He's not going to panic. He's not going to do things that he doesn't normally do when he's, face to face with a really great player.
There you go. 2 things about that. Abdul Carter, he actually dominated, all right, just so you know, in the Big Ten title game. JT Tuimoloau from Ohio State, he faced twice. Ohio State got the better of Oregon, big time in the second game, in the playoff game. But he played great players in the Big Ten. There were a couple of other players that he played that were really good in the Big Ten as well. But I also wanted to mention this part of his quote, because I always find this interesting, because I know coaches and scouts really evaluate players and how they play in games that are out of control score-wise, especially when you're on the team that's losing. And he said he played Ohio State twice, and they were getting the break speed off them in the second game, and that was in the playoff game. Remember, Ohio State just absolutely buried them in that playoff game. It was 34-7 or whatever before Oregon knew it. 41-22 or something like that was the final score. And he said, and yet he was still competing to the very last second, and that showed a lot. Those types of things you see in them. That is Dan Quinn and Adam Peters, man, to a T. That's what they didn't like about Jahan Dotson last year. They didn't like that he wasn't playing to the whistle on every single play. They traded him. They're looking for those, qualities. I'm not saying that should be the driving quality. It isn't. But they want competitors, man. They want dudes that are playing the entire way and aren't looking at the scoreboard and saying, yeah, I'm done. And the idea that he played well, and the R&D department does a great job of sort of evaluating how they do against other highly draftable players, and that he lined up and dominated Abdul Carter was obviously promising in their eyes. I think they got a good player. I mean, time will tell. Who knows? He's not going to play left tackle. He's not going to go up, week in and week out against the other team's best player. It doesn't always break that way. And you just never know. And these positions in particular are always tough. All the positions are, but they drafted a guy that they love from a competitive standpoint, from an athletic standpoint, and they felt they still needed to invest in the protection of their quarterback and I think this is important, invest in their ability to be more versatile in the run game. Getting better opportunities for people other than the quarterback to run the football. All right. When we come back, what's next? I'm going to give you kind of 5-6 players that I've talked about already in my breakdowns of some of these players. I certainly don't think I need to focus on O-line tonight. I would be shocked if they went O-line, especially that given that they essentially, he essentially said that position's depth isn't great, and it kind of fell off the cliff after the first-round players were gone. But I've got some ideas on players that they'll be looking for tonight, and I'll give you some of those when we come back. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980, theteam980.com. We're free and live on the Odyssey app. You can also check us out on our stream on our YouTube page, where we ask you to subscribe and also hit the like button for us.
All right, last night, despite having multiple offers to move off the 29th pick, Washington Commanders stick and pick, and they select Josh Conerly Jr., the offensive tackle out of Oregon. He was voted the best practice player of the week at the Senior Bowl, and Washington's coaching staff liked him so much that Cliff Kingsbury left a note on Adam Peters' desk, quote, "I stopped by, take Oregon tackle. Thanks, Cliff." Moving on to the Giants, Abdul Carter was selected at number 3. They also traded up with the Texans for number 25 overall to draft Ole Miss quarterback Jackson Dart. The Cowboys reached up for Alabama guard Tyler Booker, and the Eagles traded up with the Chiefs to select Jahad Campbell at 31. The Nats wrapped up the Beltway battle last night. They lost to the Orioles 2-1. They take on the Mets tonight on the Team 980. To the ice, the Caps are looking to take a 3-0 series lead at Bell Center. Alexei Protas missed both games so far due to a cut on his foot. He joined the team yesterday for the flight up to Montreal and joined them this morning for morning skate with the whole team. Looks like we will see him tonight. Logan Thompson will get the start pregame at 6:45 on 106.7 The Fan. This update is sponsored by the Team 980 YouTube page. Just open the app, type in the Team 980 and hit subscribe. Kevin Sheehan is live from 10 to 1 and Craig Hoffman from 4 to 7. Don't forget to like the stream and turn on notifications to stay up to date on all things DC sports. And that's what's trending.
All right, let's talk about tonight, and maybe even this weekend a little bit, but focused on tonight and assuming they stay at 61. A trade back, picking up some good value and extra picks would be nice in this draft for them. But let's assume for a moment that they're on the clock at the end of the second round, and the second round goes faster, than the first round, because you've got, I think it's instead of 10 minutes, I think you've got 5 between picks. So the second will fly, and the combined second and third will make it a late night. But Washington, as of now, doesn't have a third round pick. So I'm going to go the position groups that make the most sense. I'm going to exclude quarterback. I'm going to exclude offensive line after they drafted Josh Conerly. Let's go to defense and talk about the players that may be available at 61. I would assume that Ezeraku is going to come off the board pretty quickly. I think Mike Green, somebody's got to take a flyer on him in the second round. He's too talented. But there are a couple of players that I've mentioned. JT Tuimoloau from Ohio State, I think might be there at 61. He might not be, but to me, he is a great combo of rusher, run stopper, size, strength, and he played so big in all of their big games, especially during the postseason. Those 4 playoff games, he ended up with 6.5 sacks and a forced fumble. You go back to his sophomore year in the game that he had against Penn State, off the charts. I just think he is a big-time playmaker, and I would imagine that if he's on the board at 61, I'd be surprised, A, but B, he would have to be in consideration. Nick Scorton has been Ben's guy all along. He hasn't been picked. I would assume he goes before 61, but certainly at 61, it's better value for Scorton than I thought it would have been at 29 overall. I really like Landon Jackson from Arkansas. He is one big dude, and he has some athletic ability as well at 6'6", 270, somewhere around there. Again, I don't know that he'll be there at 61, but we'll see how these edge players come off the board, along with, some other positions that teams are going to be focused on. And I'd add one that I didn't spend a lot of time talking about, pure pass rusher at this point. Another guy like Ezeraku, who's just a little bit light at 245, 248, somewhere around there. But Josiah Stewart is a guy that I could see them liking as well. And perhaps a better chance of him being available at 61. And if I didn't mention Femi Oladejo from Ohio State, from UCLA, that's a guy I've talked about before. So those guys, in terms of the edge guys, I don't know if they'll all be there. Somebody's going to be there from that group when you get to 61. Corners. So I know that there is a corner or two that might be on the board that I think they'll like. I actually think Benjamin Morrison from Notre Dame. Look, the injuries are the big issue. And, you're talking about a guy that had some issues this year and missed a big portion of the season because of injuries. And that will be, the issue with them. 2 hip surgeries, I think, in 3 years, something like that. But he's an outstanding player, an outstanding, leader, etc. The size is solid, and I think they'll like the player. But the player that I've talked about a lot, I can't imagine that they haven't spent some time considering Darian Porter from Iowa State, given how much they are in to RAS scores, relative athletic scores. He had the 3rd best in the draft. He's 6'3". He's got the longest arms of any corner, or among the longest arms of any corner. This 6'3", 200, longest arms, the best overall, RAS among corners, plays special teams, relentless competitor. The only knock against Porter is what took Iowa State so long to play him, because he was basically just a special teams player on Matt Campbell's, roster until this year. But all of the intangibles check with Porter. He's been mocked more in the 3rd round. I can't imagine that he makes it to the 3rd round. Porter is a guy that I think could be in play at 61, and I wouldn't discount Benjamin Morrison from Notre Dame. Let's move to wide receivers. One of my favorite players in the draft after Porter is Kyle Williams from Washington State. He's been mocked, late second and third. I'm not sure there's a better separation guy, a better route runner, at this point in the draft. I think he'll be there. We've already talked about Luther Bird in the third. I didn't think they would take him if he had been there on the board in the first round for the same reasons they traded Jahan Dotson. He's going to be long gone, I would assume. I think Jalen Noel, who I like a lot as well from Iowa State, will be gone as well. But a guy like Kyle Williams might be there. And to me, he's a guy that will end up being a big-time starter. And by the way, he can play in a lot of different spots. He can play inside. He can play outside. I think he's going to be a very productive player. Finishing up with running backs, this could be the round they look at it, but they can certainly get somebody on day 3 as well. If they're looking this round, I think Judkins will be gone. I think Henderson will be gone. I really like Trevor Etienne. I've talked about him. I really like Bashal Tutin from Virginia Tech. He's more of a day 3 pick, based on the way the board or the mocks are considering, but this is going to come down to preference. I've talked about Damian Martinez now for 2 years. I'd be surprised if he's not off the board tonight. And it wouldn't surprise me if they like Devin Neal from Kansas a lot. Those would be some of the backs that maybe if they got to tonight. I'm glad they did not take a running back at 29. I'm very glad they didn't do that. 2 running backs did come off the board as projected. Genty and Hampton went in the first round. If Caleb Johnson were there, he's probably projected, mock-wise a little bit higher than, a guy like Etienne or even a guy like Martinez or Devin Neal. They're going to have a lot of choices at 61 tonight and a lot of players that really fit what they have drafted on. Athletic scores, leadership ability, smart, high IQ. Look for some of those players. I just gave you a bunch of them at the 4 positions that would seem most likely. Tight end's not out of the question, with a guy like Arroyo or a guy like Mason Taylor still on the board. I don't know. Mason Taylor, I don't see making it to 61. That's it for the day. We know who the first round pick. He's Josh Conerly Jr., and they probably have their starting right tackle for the future and maybe a distant down the line starting left tackle. I had no problem with it at all. Benefit of the doubt, Kev, working these days, but I like the pick. Back on Monday with everything else they do.